Welcome back to another episode of On Patrol with the Suffolk County PBA. I'm CJ Hunter, the treasurer of the PBA.
I'm Tanner Brandemar, the sergeant at arms with the PBA.
And today we're joined by Tom DiNapoli, the New York State Comptroller. Very excited to have him on, and thank you for joining us, Tom.
CJ and Tanner, it's great to be with you. This is the podcast to be a part of, so I'm honored to be with you guys.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Very excited. Now, you've been in New York State politics for a long time now, but you're born and raised right here on Long Island.
Yeah. Mercy Hospital, Rockville Center. My family, when the immigrant grandparents came over, they spent a little time in Brooklyn, but they moved out to Long Island. My parents were both born and raised in Roslyn, and my brother and I were both born at Mercy Hospital. We lived in Albertson, it's a little hamlet between Roslyn and Wollston Park. And after I decided to leave the house that I grew up in, ended up in Great Neck. I've been there ever since. So long time on Long Island. Very proud of my family's tradition on the island. Although at this stage, most of my family has migrated out here to Suffolk County. So kind of that migration a lot of families experience, city, Nassau, out to Suffolk, that's been our family's trajectory. So maybe one day I'll be out in Suffolk too, but so far I'm still a Nassau guy.
Well, we'd be happy to have you out here. So you started off in politics with the New York State Assembly.
Well, yes, in terms of Democratic politics, but actually the very first election I was involved in was when I ran for a seat on the Board of Education.
Oh, wow.
So, a teenager when you did that?
I was a senior in high school. I turned 18 in my senior year in February. And it was actually the first year of the 18-year-old vote. And back in the day, many of us were concerned about some of the things going on in the school district, wanted to see some changes, and we were thinking about backing a candidate for the school board. And then some of us got the notion, well, instead of backing somebody else, maybe one of us should run. So I was going to be a commuter. I went to Hofstra, so I was staying home as opposed to many of my friends that went away for college. And they said, well, Tom, why don't you do it? And first thought about doing it more or less to just raise issues, but really got into it. So got the petition filled out, and I had the unique experience of the very first time I voted. I voted for myself.
Wow, that's incredible. That's wild.
And the election was on May 3rd, and I won. So I was the first 18-year-old elected to anything in New York State. So that's my little footnote to history. It's not so much, that I've been state controller or anything else. It's that I was the first 18-year-old. But that's really what launched me in terms of elective office being something
that's
that appealed
really interesting, because we say all the time, a lot of the Board of Ed people could be the future county legislators, future assembly people. And you're living proof of that.
Absolutely. So when I got involved, and school board is not partisan, so it wasn't political. In fact, some of my biggest supporters were registered conservatives and Republicans, because the school issues were not, Democrat or Republican. But along the way, I did get involved with the Democratic Party. So I actually ran for town office in North Hempstead unsuccessfully. But I had been living in Great Neck for a bit, and the May Newberger, who some may remember, was town supervisor of North Hempstead, but before that was in the state assembly. She retired from the assembly, and a lot of folks came to me and said, well, why don't you consider, throwing your, hat in the ring, as they say in politics, right? So I ended up running for the state assembly. So you're right. The first partisan political office was when I ran for state assembly, and had the privilege to represent Northwest Nassau County for 20 years.
Wow, that's great. And so what was it like being an assemblyman now? You had this experience with the Board of Ed. Yep. You decide to throw your hat in the ring and run for assembly. It's an exciting time. What's it like when you finally get up there to Albany?
Well, it's interesting you ask that. First of all, Board of Education is very different than state assembly, right? Because the level of partisanship brings a whole nother dimension. But I had actually worked shortly out of college for part of a session in the state legislature of my local assemblyman. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't love the whole scene in Albany. So what it was like for me when I was elected and I had to show up at Albany, I was like, wait a minute, I was here a few years ago and I thought I would never end up back here again. But I knew I wanted to do politics full time. And the opportunity at that point for me, I mean, back in those days, Democrats generally didn't get elected in Nassau County. The assembly seat was winnable for a member of my party. So that was the opportunity. And, I had worked for my professional job. I worked for AT&T, prior to be elected to the assembly. It was a big change going from a corporate environment to a full-time political environment. And in the beginning, it was a little challenging because, the assembly was a little freewheeling. And, when I worked for the corporation, you had a question, there was a rule book. It told you what to do. You go to the assembly, There's no rule book. But the privilege to represent the neighborhoods that I knew well, that I lived in, pretty much all my life. It was an exciting opportunity, and I very quickly realized that by making partnerships, working in coalition, you could get things done. And so I embraced the role of being a legislator, and I have to say that it was a very rewarding experience. And I particularly got to know many of the folks out here in Suffolk County because I worked with Senator Ken LaValle on the Pine Barrens Protection Act. And of all the things I've done in my career, helping to preserve the Pine Barrens is probably certainly the legislative achievement I would point to was the most important one. But I really got to know Suffolk County, particularly on the eastern end of the county, really was reminded of what a great area this is, how important our groundwater resources. That was a lot of the driver of the Pine Barrens Protection Act, and also the importance of managing development in a way that preserves a key ecological area like the Pine Barrens, but also recognizes you still need development and growth. And so that process created, I think, one of the most effective models for responsible land use management, and certainly has helped to keep the East End a very attractive place for people to live and visit, and certainly protected an important groundwater resource as well. So the ability in the assembly to make a difference, whether it was a small issue that might have appealed to a certain neighborhood of my district or a bigger regional issue, like the Pine Barrens, I think very fondly on those years in the assembly.
Right. And I find it interesting how you bring up the value of building partnerships and having coalitions early on in your political career, because now as comptroller, I feel like people on both sides of the aisle, whether you're Democrat, Republican, the conservatives, working families, whatever party you're in, everybody seems to support you, and everybody really appreciates the job you're doing managing the state finances and funds.
I appreciate you saying that. Look, this office is the least political of all the, or at least partisan, and that's been the tradition for a long time.
Right.
Whoever the control has been, whatever party, and in this very polarized environment, sometimes it's hard to maintain that. Mm-hmm. But I think if you're going to have credibility, if you're talking about the state's finances, if you're doing an audit, if people perceive that you're just following a partisan agenda, you're not going to have any credibility to do the job. And for me, look, I grew up. I mean, I'm a Democrat. My family were all Republicans. I never had a sense that one side is intrinsically better than the other side. There's too much of that, I think, in politics. And the years I was in the state legislature, it's different now, but the years I was there, the Senate was always Republican. Assembly was always Democrat. You had to find common ground. You had to work together. And the strength, especially for the Long Island delegation back then, is that the Senate was largely dominated by the Long Island Republicans. Again, different dynamic now, but we Democrats had to find partners. I did a lot with Ken LaValle, but with the other senators from Long Island as well. So I when I had that transition to be state controller, I also keep in mind. And we could talk about that if you want, but I only got there because I had support from both sides of the aisle. Otherwise, I would have never been state controller. So I've tried to continue to keep that sense of we got to be there to serve the people regardless of party. And I can't look at everything through a partisan lens.
Right. And you became comptroller through a unique set of circumstances, too. You weren't initially elected to the position. You were, but by the Assembly and the Senate, not by the general public.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, not such a unique circumstance in New York. My predecessor got in trouble, had to resign.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, in later years, ended up in prison over pension fund management issues. But when he resigned, it created a vacancy in the office. And under the state constitution, when there's a vacancy in the controller's office or the attorney general's office, the state legislature, sitting as a unicameral body, which rarely happens, has to pick the replacement. So a lot of folks put their name in for it. There was an interview process. It did get somewhat contentious and somewhat political. You used the kind of neutral word. It was a unique situation.
Right.
It was a very contentious situation back then because we had a new governor, and the governor at the time and I are friends, but at the time he had a strong opinion a legislator should not be controller. Although when you look at who ends up being controller, it's usually someone who comes out of the legislature at some point. So there was a battle. And, for me, fortunately, I had support of most of the Democrats, not all, but a significant part of the Republican Party. And I have to say with gratitude, starting with the Long Island delegation, the Republican Assembly members, with one exception, and all the Republican senators supported me. So it was definitely a bipartisan vote of confidence. And, when I look back, it's a few years now, a lot of the folks who are critical of me getting the position are long gone, and we're still there doing the job. So I think those legislators that were willing to have confidence in me, I've always tried very hard never to let them down, because they took a lot of political hits. The editorials, except for Newsday, I have to say. Newsday was very supportive because they knew me, right? Some of the other editorials.
Yeah, local guy.
Yeah. But some of the other editorials didn't know me so well, and they assumed I had three heads and, I didn't know what I was doing. But I always feel a tremendous obligation to the legislators who had confidence in me not to let them down. So I try to hold myself to a very high standard.
Did you have, did the governor have his own pick, or was he kind of battling against you? How did that work?
It was so strange. In the end, he did not have his own pick, but he had this notion that anybody coming out of the legislature couldn't possibly do the job. And that, we were reforming Albany, and anybody that's been around is not going to be the right choice. It did come down, there was one other, so the way the process worked, there were two names put in nomination, for the position. And he didn't formally back the other candidate, but he made clear he didn't want, it wasn't so much directed at me personally, it was directed at somebody coming out of the legislature, which obviously annoyed many of the legislators to say, well, wait a minute, we've been doing this work for a while, how come we can't be considered for this position? And keep in mind, my immediate predecessor, Alan Hevesy, he had been in the Assembly for many years. Carl McCall was a state senator, another former controller. Ned Regan, the last Republican controller, he wasn't in the state legislature, but he was a county executive out of Erie County. So it's always been a position where people have gotten there through the political ranks. I think part of what was misunderstood from what the governor then was saying is that it had to be someone who came out of Wall Street. It's never been someone who comes out of Wall Street.
Right.
Yeah, you have a lot to do with the finances, but you hire the smart people to do the investing.
You built a team around you.
Yeah, I'm the trustee for the fund, but I'm not the one sitting there picking the stocks. I mean, we have a professional staff that does that. We have advisors. But the job is not just about, the pension fund investment, as important as that is, especially for your members in the PBA. But we have the audit division. We have state operations that make sure people get, state employees get paid and contracts get approved and nonprofits get their money and businesses get paid. We have the budget and policy group that looks at the state finances, issues research reports. We manage the state's 529 college savings plan, the New York ABLE plan for people with disabilities that want to save, the state's oil spill fund, unclaimed funds.
Yes.
And we
Yes,
found
we just
some money
talked
for
about
the PBA, right? And we want all those that are viewing the podcast and listening to check for unclaimed funds. So you look at the variety of responsibilities in the controller's office. No one person is going to be an expert in all of those positions. And we have a legal division and we have an investigations division. So to me, the role is ultimately a management job. Mm-hmm. And I did, I don't have the chance to talk about it a lot, so I appreciate this conversation. But I did work in the private sector. I was at a management level. My master's degree is in management from the New School University in the city. I got that going at night when I was working in the city for AT&T. So that's the experience I brought. Plus, being in the legislature for 20 years and working on fiscal issues. I was on the Ways and Means Committee for about 15 years. That's the Finance Committee for the Assembly. I chaired the Local Governments Committee, the Government Operations Committee. So a lot of the functions that we review with the Controller's Office is exactly what I've been working on. Right. And if you pluck somebody from the private sector because they had a Wall Street background, they wouldn't know any of this. And I think it was especially true given how I came to the position where my predecessor had to resign. And given the challenges that we're going through today, you want somebody in this role who understands the importance of not only managing the job and getting good results, but doing it right. So I think issues of integrity and ethics and transparency and openness, that's key. And I think on those measures, I've always set those as very key priorities and hold myself to a high standard. And I think that's why I've been fortunate that when I've gone before the voters, because you're right, I started out as an appointment. Most people didn't know me, so I had to run. And in 2010, it was a tight race. But having run in 2014, 2018, 2022, I've been very fortunate that the voters have seen the benefit of my work. I hope that they'll continue to see that in 2026 because I love the job and I'm not looking to complete it yet. There's still a lot of work to do, but it gave me such a different perspective of when the voters gave me the stamp of approval. I mean, it was great that my colleagues supported me for this position because they knew me really well. When you're appealing to millions of voters in New York, how many of them really know you, right?
Right, yeah. Right.
But still, when you get that validation from an election, that certainly continues to inspire me to
right.
move forward.
It starts to speak volumes when the people are now electing you into position. And like you put it, you're really a team manager. We're not electing the investor. Right. We're electing the team manager, the person who can manage personalities, manage different interests, and make sure everything comes back to what ultimately is the best result for taxpayers, pensioners, and anybody else, all the other services you provide, the unclaimed funds, putting the team together to best service everybody and all the interests.
And not being afraid to hire people who are smarter than you are. I say it all the time. I have a great team and I have great experts and I don't need to be better than them. I just got to make sure I got the right people in the right places. Right.
And we say it all the time here. The staff that you have right now, Jason, Amber, Michael locally, those people are great. Anytime we have any questions, any concerns, we need help with any sort of issue to help rectify a problem for one of our members, they are a phone call away and they pick it up second ring.
That doesn't always happen in other offices. A lot of times you get a voicemail. It takes days to get back to you. Your people are great. Amber and Jason do a tremendous job, and Michael as well. They really get back to us quick and help us solve the problems with our members, which is important to us.
Right, and that's a reflection on you as team manager.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, CJ. And I appreciate that because, look, we're about 2,800 employees, right? We're a big operation. We're located all across the state, not just in Albany, unless where most of the employees are. Obviously, I can't do it all. And I do have a good team, and I appreciate what you're saying. And I just want you to know we appreciate Suffolk PBA. We appreciate the leadership role that you and your colleagues play and the work that the men and women who you represent do each and every day. And so certainly when we hear that there's an issue with one of your colleagues, one of your members, we're going to be right on it to get to a positive resolution.
Thank you. And obviously us as police officers representing police officers, you actually come from a family where you had police officers in your family. Right? You have a cousin who was a Nassau County police officer?
Yeah, my cousin Brian, he was NYPD, and then he transferred to Nassau County. And he was on the job when 9/11 happened. Obviously, he wasn't at ground zero, but like so many other police officers, he was there for the recovery and spent a lot of time down there. He retired from Nassau County PD, and a few years after he retired, he developed a 9/11 related brain cancer, and it was a very sad end of life for him. He passed away at age 53.
Oh my God, young man.
And as you know, just recently Nassau County named the street where he lived in his name, Brian Abernathy Way. And he's been gone for a number of years. So actually the street naming, which was bittersweet, we were worried it was going to be a very sad moment, but in fact, it was a celebratory moment. Commissioner Ryder, who does a great job in Nassau as a police commissioner, he spoke and presided at it, and he started by saying, this is a celebration of Brian's service and Brian's life. He was a member of the volunteer fire department too locally, as a lot of your members are also, right? There's often that overlap, pleased to mention that his son follows in his footsteps. He's NYPD.
Oh, it's great to hear.
And he lives out here in Suffolk County, by the way.
Love it.
He's NYPD. I think he's closing in on almost 10 years now as a city police officer. So, like so many of your colleagues, it's a family tradition.
Right.
And I had my one aunt who's still alive was at the street naming. She's in her 90s, and the Commissioner Ryder introduced himself to her and welcomed her. And I told the commissioner, I said, by the way, Aunt Tessie's husband, my Uncle John, he was a Nassau County police officer as well. So we certainly have valued the service that members of my family have put into NYPD, Nassau County Police, and even at the Police Memorial here in Suffolk County, where we participated. The name that was added today was also a 9/11 related death.
Yeah, we're still losing men and women every year.
This is, it's so hard to believe.
It is.
It feels like it was so long ago, and yet it's a reminder that people are still living with that. And that's why, certainly whatever debates are going on in Washington, we have to make sure they keep the World Trade Center health programs to be there, because, the challenge is many of these conditions do not become evident until years later.
Correct.
So this is going to be with us still for many years to come. So we have to be mindful of it and never take for granted. I mean, you've had the names were read this today with the memorial. You've had members that have lost their lives, whether it was right on the job that moment or with a 9/11 related case. And there are other injuries that happen. I know you just had an incident recently with the officer who was slashed, was reported in Newsday. We should never take for granted that when you and your colleagues show up, you don't know what's on the other end of that call. You don't know what's going to happen, but the selfless dedication that Suffolk police officers provide every day, we should never undervalue that. We should appreciate it. And that's part of why whenever we hear of an issue that you bring up, or Suffolk PBA or Lou, whoever contacts us, we put a high priority on getting a positive resolution. My feeling is there isn't enough that we could do for the men and women in law enforcement, because you are doing so much for us each and every day.
We appreciate you saying that. And it really goes a long way too, where, obviously, after the recession in 2008, there was several variations of pension reform in 2009, again in 2012. And I think it's great that we were finally able to come to a situation last year where we were able to improve retirement benefits for police officers again that have been hired since those dates.
Well, part of the reason we were able to do this, we kept the plan well funded.
Yes.
Right? If the plan wasn't well funded, you couldn't do anything. So that's why we take seriously where we're investing money and how, but also in terms of my role as trustee, I have to set the contribution rate for the government employers. And I've never been shy about saying we've got to set the rate at a level that the plans are going to stay well funded.
Right.
And I think, the message for moving forward is I know that there's a desire to do some other enhancements. If we can keep the plan well funded, we could, entertain that. Many of the retirees would like to see an enhancement in the cost of living adjustment. All of this has an impact on the fund, and we have to be mindful of that. But at the time that the Tier 6 changes came in, I expressed my concerns about it. I felt it went too far. That governor wasn't happy with me. That was a different governor, but I have a way of getting some of the governors to be mad at me, apparently. So now, of course, we're having to go do some do-overs. But I am concerned right now. There's a lot of volatility in the stock market, and I know some of the retirees are very concerned, and the members. But I like to remind everyone, we're diversified. We're not just investing in the stock market. We're well funded. We're going to get through the ups and downs. We always do. And don't get nervous if you just see that the market's low. It is nerve-wracking. You don't like to see the volatility, but that's why we don't put all our money in just one place.
Right, and doing it responsibly, as you put it, because what good is it to have a robust pension benefit if it can't be paid 10 years from now?
Right, exactly.
Right, so it has to be done responsibly.
And that's the point, right? We're investing. We're obviously investing for the people who are retired today and the people who are working today. But most importantly, because we're so well funded, we're really worried about the person who's starting the job, in Suffolk County Police Department tomorrow. Are we going to have the money for them 20 years from now? Right. Those are the folks who we're really thinking about, because we have enough money for the folks who are on the job today and the retirees of today. We have to make sure we have the money for the folks down the road. Right.
And that's gone a long way with maintaining our defined benefit.
Absolutely.
Right? Because a lot of states went to a defined contribution rate, 401k plans, 457b plans, and they got rid of that defined benefit pensions.
It hasn't happened a lot, but it's starting to happen, and there's always that pressure. Yeah.
Do you go back and forth a lot with the legislature about the adjustments that could be made to Tier 6? How does that work?
We're always asked, and we're very mindful that it's the legislature's job and the governor to make these decisions. So I don't, presume to tell them what they should or shouldn't do. But we provide, even before there's an actual bill, we'll give some guidance in terms of what we think, they need to understand of the implications of any proposal. And then, as you know, when there's a formal bill to enhance a benefit, we have to provide the fiscal note. So that's where our actuaries get involved. And sometimes, folks say, why is that fiscal note so expensive? Again, it's not for just looking at today. It's looking at what will this mean down the road when you enhance a benefit. Yeah. So we do provide that kind of input. But again, I respect the fact that it's the legislature's role to make those decisions. And whatever they decide, we'll make sure it gets implemented. And if I have to factor that into the contribution rate, even if it means having to raise the rate, we'll do it.
Right.
Because I don't want the plan ever to be poorly funded.
I think your transparency is very admirable. I think it's important that the public knows the truth about what's going on. I think we appreciate your honesty about it, and also keeping it up to make sure that all the workers that the jobs stay have the same amount of employees to be able to work. So
yeah. No, it's always a balancing act in government, and it's becoming even more challenging these days. But I think as long as you're open with what you're doing and how you get to your decisions, people are going to respect that. And at the end of the day, I will always take most seriously my role as trustee, as that I have to make the decisions that are in the best interest of the members. And the best interest of the members is for me to make sure that the plan is well funded in terms of contribution rate, in terms of where we're putting our money. As you know, there are often a lot of political pressures on where to put money, where to not put money, make a statement, and I understand. We want to be responsible. We want to hold companies we invest in to be responsible. But the pension fund cannot be turned into a political football because you're mad at a certain company or a certain individual on a given day, or there's a national or international issue going on. You can't be. You cannot manage a pension fund responsibly if you're just going to look at the politics. And I think that's unfortunately what happens in some cases. And I know that opens us up to criticism. Sometimes people feel, you're not being responsive to this big concern that's out there. But the problem with that is that, whenever it gets so political, there's always another side, right?
Right, correct.
So you're going to divest from this and they're going to be mad at you, So
right.
Again, I think we can always defend whatever decision we make. That if we make a decision to do a move, it's not going to harm the fund.
Right.
And if we're going to do a shareholder proposal, it's to protect our investment. Look, at the end of the day, we are large because we're so big, right? We're not day traders. We're not moving money every day. We do an asset allocation. We have long-standing relationships, especially with the stocks. We're largely a passive investor. We buy the stock and we hold it. It rides with the market up and down. So we do want companies to be responsible on how they treat workers, on the environment, on a host of issues. But we prefer to stay invested over the long term with companies. So just, when you're mad at a company just pulling the money out, it doesn't really change things. That you lose your voice at that company, and especially because so much of our money are in index funds. If you start distorting the index by taking money out, you defeat the purpose of why you first put the money into the index to begin with. So I know it gets a little technical and a little complicated, but it's been a strategy that served us well, and it's part of why we are so well funded.
Yeah, and I think it speaks volumes and adds credibility to what we've basically been speaking about this entire conversation, how you have been a manager of the team that does what's in the best interest of the pensioners and what's in the best interest of the taxpayers. Yeah. It's not about what's a hot topic in politics today. Right. It's about what is most responsible long term. Yeah.
Yeah. Like everything else, it's a balancing act sometimes, but I think we strike the balance in the right way. Right. And again, I have to remind the person that says, divest from this, or the local official that says, how come, my employer contribution rate's going up too much? Why do you have to be so well funded? I always have to come back and say this. At the end of the day, I have to make the judgment with my team as to what's in the best interest of the men and women who are part of the pension plan. And I can't put a priority on these other kinds of considerations. And I think so far we've certainly stayed true to that.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one of the things that we get presented with from time to time from members is the length of time it takes for a pension to get finalized, right? So I've heard from Chris Wolf, who's up in Albany all the time, that there's now a new program that you're trying to implement that might help speed along the process a bit for pensioners.
Yeah, we've had a system upgrade that has been implemented. It's not working quite as well as I'd like it to work, so we're doing some fixes to that. The other challenge is that we've had some resource issues in terms of personnel. Like a lot of government agencies, it's been harder post-COVID to recruit people and retain them. But the good news is we've had a pretty serious recruitment effort. We're adding staff across the agency, but adding a fair number to the retirement system. So we're very mindful of the fact that we do have some backlogs that we're not satisfied with at all. Keep in mind, one of the other challenges we've had is that particularly coming out of COVID, the number of retirements has accelerated significantly. Right. And some of the challenges are, it's not just the way our system is set up, it's also you have to chase after the local employers to make sure that we're getting all the information on the work history. And often what happens is until someone's about to retire, they don't necessarily keep up with, does the system have all their information? Or, did they recently get an increase because of a contract agreement or overtime or whatever? If there's a lag in us getting that information, that's part of what contributes to the backlog. So part of what we're implementing with the new system now is getting employers on. So it's meant to be more user-friendly for members to sign on and do some of these activities without having to go through, a paper transaction or the call center. But part of what we're trying to do is now get all employers on so that when they want to report someone's service, someone's time, someone's salary adjustment, someone's overtime, they do it electronically so that we're not at the time that someone's already retired, having to chase after.
You're getting it in real time.
That's what we're trying, but that's not fully implemented yet. So that's part of the problem that's created the lag. What we do though when someone retires is that we do a calculation. So we did an internal analysis, and if I have my statistics right, 87% of the retirees get about 90% of what their final pension would be from the beginning.
Okay.
So it's where we had some issues, and where you and your colleagues at PBA, and credit to Lou and the team, have been helpful. We have had some cases, for instance, with disability. where folks get approved and they haven't then gotten the payment fast enough. And so we're trying to correct that. But that's where, again, what you and your colleagues do with PBA to let us know when there are problems, that makes it, because, sometimes the members don't know who to call, where to go. Right. So they're just sitting home getting mad about the system. They should know that they should talk to their delegates, talk to the leadership of the PBA, because how to be in touch with me or with Jason and Amber,
right?
Or Michael, who you were kind enough to mention earlier, and then we could then expedite correcting any problem that's out there. Again, it's an important role that you play with the PBA that your members should appreciate and utilize. Because you're the mouthpieces, you're the advocates for them, and you're the ones to get after us. And that's the way it should be.
Right. That open line of communication, not only does it help our members, but it also helps you understand what sort of issues are out there and might be affecting other unions and other jobs.
Absolutely. And that's why I say to my team, we can't be satisfied with where we're at. We have to have 100% good customer service, and we're not there yet with this. And I know it's a big system, and it's 1.2 million members. It's not easy, and technology. Everybody thinks is going to fix everything, and sometimes it creates
more headaches. Yeah.
More headaches, right, Tanner? New headaches, no problem. So we're trying to work that out. But again, it is that partnership, and as Chris probably told you, we just had a meeting recently in Albany with police and fire, and all the union representatives to go over what we're doing to try to meet some of the concerns that we're hearing, what we're trying to do to make the system more efficient, and just to be remind you and your colleagues, just let us know whenever you hear of a member that really is hurting. And I know some of the situations, can be very difficult, right? Someone may be waiting to get a finalization or waiting to get disability payment. And maybe they have a terminal disease. I mean, those are the kind of things we don't want to see those people or those families suffer. Or God forbid you have a member, that passes away, whatever the circumstance, and they're not sure how to get the survivor's pension or death benefit. We will expedite those kind of situations.
Right, and there are unique circumstances, like you put it. Sometimes guys do retire with a terminal disease, and maybe they want to make sure they have all their ducks in a row and have everything in line to make sure that their spouse, their children, whoever their beneficiaries are that they're leaving behind, they want to make sure that they're going to be taken care of and be set up as best as possible in their absence.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. And sometimes, when we look at the big numbers and we don't know all those personal situations.
Right.
So CJ gets back to you and your colleagues. You got to let us know when you hear of these situations, and we'll get right at it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And is there anything else that could be done differently to help you in this process with updating the technology and updating the timeliness of how it works generally, but without it being a special case?
Well, I have to say my thanks to all the unions for really helping us with the legislature going back, I guess, about two years ago now, to have our budget be approved to hire more staff. So that was helpful. And certainly working with us to ensure that Suffolk County and the other employers are on the enhanced reporting, reminding them that that's a benefit that your members
the enhanced reporting program.
That would be helpful also. But I want to assure you, we're not satisfied with where it's at. We're working hard to get it to where we want it to be, and I appreciate the patience that the members have had with our progress in that regard.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And one thing that I found interesting too was earlier on, and we touched on it slightly during this episode, but we talked about it a little bit outside of the hall too. All the different things that the comptroller's office does, and how you manage the investments, how it's not just the stocks, it's not just the bonds, but we're also in real estate. Yeah. We're also in, what else are we invested in? Not just the stocks and bonds that people might think of.
And they do think of that, right? So when the stock market goes down, I get the phone calls and say, "What happened? Are you moving the money?" I said, "Well, so like most pension funds and big institutional investors, we have a very diversified portfolio. Mm-hmm. And what we do is every 5 years, we do a very deep dive on our asset allocation, what we call it, which is where you're going to put how much money, what percentage, where you're going to put it. And we just completed that process not too long ago. So we're now, I mean, the biggest part of the portfolio is certainly in public equity or the stocks everybody's familiar with. And that's served us well. But we have put a smaller percentage there because of the volatility. And so let's say we do rough numbers, low 40%. And then we do anywhere from, 22 to 25% in fixed income. So treasuries, other kind of fixed income instruments that, given interest rates, until recently, you weren't making much money there. The rates have been a bit higher, so doing a little better there. The balance of the portfolio, it's in what we call the alternatives of the private markets. The reason we put more money in the private markets is that they are not, the phrase is correlated, or they're not tied to how the stock market is performing. Because when you put money, let's say in private equity, you're putting money in there, you're not going to realize the benefit, for 7 to 10 years, because, it takes a while for you to, to exit the private equity and where you get the return. Real estate functions in a similar way. In recent years, we've had an asset allocation for what we call real assets or infrastructure, because there's been a lot going on, there with some of the new energy strategies and roadways. I mean, you go down the list of infrastructure needs, not just in the U.S., but globally. And then we've had some credit vehicles as well. So we've actually upped the percentage of money that we've put in private equity and real estate. And we do this because we don't want to have everything in the stock market because of all the volatility there. And you can't put everything in fixed income because, the return has not been so high. So we think that mix is the best mix to meet our long-term goal, which is 5.9% return over the long haul. Last year, we valued the fund March 31st. I don't have the final numbers for this year. But for 2024, we had 11.5% return. So way in excess of 5.9. Yeah, that's great. We won't have it this year because of what's been going on with the markets. But I think we'll be pretty close to the 5.9, maybe even meet it. But so the portfolio is set up to, over time, meaning 20, 30-year horizon, to meet that 5.9% goal. It's a more conservative goal. Most pension funds are closer to 7%, but I think being more conservative in the long run positions us better to meet that goal, to keep the plans well funded, and to have a positive impact for members and for the employers who are, picking up much of the freight for it. I
agree 100%. And it makes common sense to anticipate less of a return to make sure that you are funded. You don't want to anticipate a larger return, not have it, and end up falling short in the end.
Yeah. I mean, the irony is if you anticipate a larger return, in some ways your numbers look better, just the way the calculations are done. Because if you took our 5.9% goal and applied it to other pension funds, even in our own state, their numbers wouldn't look so good because they're making an assumption that they're going to be making more money than they really are.
Right.
Probably provides a lot of stress on the plans if they don't reach that goal.
It does. So they have to ultimately make up for it with increased contribution rates. Yeah.
The members won't be happy about that.
Well, or the employer, because the employer is the contribution rate as well.
And that's what, and that's part of the balancing act, because you don't want to raise the rate so much that the employers start to say, hey, we can't afford it.
Right.
Or the editorials start getting rid of the pension funds. They'll start to write, we all can't afford these pensions. Look, there are a lot of people out there, unfortunately, in the private sector that don't have defined benefit pensions. And sometimes they're critical of those of us that have it. But, these are the choices people make, when they start a career.
Right.
And most of our public employees could make more money sooner if they did something else. But the trade-off is, if you put the time in, there'll be that defined benefit pension. And certainly as we go through volatile times like this, I think people start to appreciate having that defined benefit pension is a huge difference. In the old days, they talked about the three-legged stool. Most people don't have that anymore. The three-legged stool, I think of my dad worked 40 years for the New York Telephone Company, and back when they still had defined benefit pensions. So he retired in his 60s. It wasn't a huge pension, but it was there. And he had Social Security.
Right.
That was always there. And he had personal savings. My father was a Depression era guy, so he saved. My mom, unfortunately, she was a civil service worker. She worked for the Nassau County Police Department, actually. She was a records clerk. I don't know if you knew that. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she was a records clerk at police headquarters in Mineola. But she died while she was still working. Unfortunately, she did not live to see her pension. But I remember when she'd get the controller's office statements on her, how many years she had in and what her benefit would be. It gave her a good sense of security about what her golden years would be like. Unfortunately, as I said, she didn't get to her golden years. But my father, he did. He lived to 92, actually. But he was able to stay in the house on Long Island all those years that they built after the war when they got married and before I came along. And he did it because of that pension and Social Security and personal savings.
Right.
And so many folks do not have, maybe they have, they certainly have at least one of those, but they often don't have all three.
Right.
And if all you have is Social Security and a 401k, again, depending on, even if you're very smart, if you hit the market at the wrong time, not in your control, you may have to put off retirement. I think about all the people when the Great Recession hit, whenever that was a dozen years ago, COVID closed down, or even some of the recent volatility. And the 401ks, like the saying went, you go to 201ks. You don't have that. You can't plan with a defined benefit pension. I'm sure everybody would like their pension to be even higher than it is. But when you know what it is, you could plan.
You can plan
accordingly. You know
accordingly.
Social Security. You know what your pension is, and hopefully you've done some savings along the way. And I even say to our members who are part of the system, don't put it all on the pension, right? You should still do personal savings. For me working for the state, we have the deferred compensation,
yes.
right? The 457 plan. I wish I had joined it a lot sooner than I did, right? I didn't join it very early in my career, but I did figure out along the way to join, and that's grown over the years as well. Sometimes people thank me for that. I don't do the deferred comp, so tell your members don't thank me for that. That's a separate entity does the 457. But we do the 529 college savings plan, which has worked very well for many families to help to afford higher education for their children or their grandchildren. So, but just those that can have the pension as your members do, count on Social Security. We hope the feds don't change that. I don't think they will in the end, because politically, I can't imagine they can touch that. And be responsible with personal savings as well.
Right.
Figure out how to do that three-legged stool, and be thankful as a Suffolk County police officer, as a public employee, you have one of the legs of that three-legged stool that has always provided security in retirement years that so many of your neighbors do not have anymore. So it's a very important benefit that your members have earned. My job is to protect it, but it should never be undervalued, because it is a very important benefit.
And our members are confident that they're going to get paid through their pension, which is also a great benefit of that. So thank you for that.
Right. And speaking of where do we rank right now as far as the public pensions go? Like, as far as how well funded we are?
So we every year we do the numbers. Last year we were at 93% funded.
Right.
Well, anything in the 90s. I mean, I think 3 years ago, we were like 103%. So it always goes up and down depending on the year and what number you make. So I don't know the number for this year. It'll depend on that final investment return, but I'm confident we'll still be in the 90s, which puts us, some years we're the top, some years we're number 3. We're going to be in the top tier.
Right.
And I have to say all the New York plans are well funded. State teachers and the 5 New York City plans were often compared to the New York City plans, and they're well funded, but they're in the mid 80s. We're 93. Again, our management has kept a priority on keeping the plan well funded, and that helps us weather the kind of volatile time we're going through now. It helps us be in a position when you won the Tier 6 improvements, we could say, we could pay for it. We could manage that. So that's why all of the pieces of the puzzle we've been talking about, we're keeping it together. The puzzle is still holding together.
Yeah, and I think that goes a long way to our members. Like Tanner said, everybody feels confident that their pensions will be there for them when they do eventually retire. They'll be able to retire and live a good life with their families and with dignity, and be very comfortable. So we appreciate all the work you and your staff do. Do you have any parting remarks? Anything you want to throw out there that maybe we didn't cover?
We covered a lot. I mean, the first thing I want to do, though, is just echo the word that you just used, that word dignity.
Yeah.
First of all, your members are entitled to dignity on the job, first and foremost, in terms of how they're respected by Suffolk County as an employer, working conditions to be safe, and entitled to dignity from the public that you're serving. And I know it's been a tough time in law enforcement, and I think too many folks have not valued the fact that you are there to protect lives and property each and every day. You don't know what's going to be on the other end of a call. And that's where, again, the role of the PBA is so very important, because you are the ones to stand up for your members. You're the ones to stand up for the men and women who deserve that dignity on the job. And then to be the advocates, as you are, to protect our defined benefit pension, to keep an eye on me and my team to make sure, we're managing it in the appropriate way, serving the members on the benefit administration side, but also being mindful of how we're managing the investments. That's an important way that you are preserving that benefit in a responsible way for your members, because that dignity should not just be in the working years. That dignity certainly should be in retirement. And that's where retirement security absolutely comes in. I would just say, I appreciate the partnership. Lou Savillo and your team have had more than an open door relationship with my office, and that works both ways. We keep the door open, and you keep the door open on your end, and I value that. As a Long Islander, I value the service that you and your members provide here. And I would just say that I know that the work we do, and we touched on some of the variety of it, our work is not always on the front page of the papers, right? It's a little more, I always say we're kind of the back office part of the operation. But I want your members to know that the team that I'm a part of, and I say team, and I emphasize that, very dedicated public servants. I really feel privileged to be state controller, to work with men and women who understand the unique role of our office with all the variety of responsibilities. At the end of the day, we are the office most clearly tied to transparency and accountability in government. And whether that's with the reports we put out or the audits that we do or responding to requests that come in about any issue, or if we get a tip of something fraudulent that's happening and we have to do then an investigation and follow up, certainly managing the pension fund, as we've talked a lot about, whatever the responsibility is, we put a priority on doing our work in an accountable way, in a transparent way, and in a way to show that government, in fact, can work and do things in the correct way. And that's why, for me, it's been a privilege for me to be state controller. I'll mention one other little interesting factoid. The very first state controller, the title was created in 1797. So the job goes back a long time. Tara's looking like, what? Yeah, 1797. The first controller came from Long Island. And there was no controller from 1797 till 2007 till I got appointed that came from Long Island. They never let us have. Now, the first controller, I'm going to test you guys, throw a question back at you. Do either of you know the name of the first New York State controller?
No, absolutely not. I don't.
He's a Long Islander?
Long Islander.
Oh, man. Trying to think of the names of buildings up in Albany, too. Maybe one's named after him. You know what?
Can I give you guys a hint?
Yes.
Are there any famous beaches on Long Island?
Jones Beach?
Samuel Jones. Samuel Jones was the first controller. His family had a homestead in Oyster Bay by the ocean. And so his property was eventually, Robert Moses ended up taking it, and they named it Jones Beach after Samuel Jones.
Well, look at that.
Now, I am not predicting there will be a DiNapoli beach anywhere. It doesn't flow. It doesn't sound right. I'll give you one other little test. Do you know who the first? Do you know who the first? Because the controllers were appointed back in the day.
Okay.
Where they were never elected until there were too many scandals. What happened was the controllers would always call it the legislature for misspending money, so they got unappointed. So then there were too many scandals, and they decided to change to an elected controller responsible to the people, to be independent. You know who the first elected controller was?
Oh, geez. I do not.
In the 1840s. I know you guys weren't around then. Well, I'll ask it another way. Do you know who the only New York State controller, the name of the only New York State controller who became president of the United States was? Do you know what that name is?
In the 1840s?
Uh-huh.
Controller. I don't think I know.
Boy, you guys are killing me. See? So the fellow, you're going to laugh when I say the name. The fellow, he was a member of the Whig Party back when we had a Whig Party. He was elected New York State Comptroller, and the Whig Party was looking for a vice presidential candidate. So they said, this guy won in New York, let's put him on the ticket. And the president at the time managed to die in office. And so the vice president became president, Millard Fillmore.
Get out of here.
Yeah, so Millard Fillmore.
So first elected comptroller in New York State.
Yes. And
wow.
Now, he didn't have a great reputation as a president, but I hear he was a damn good controller. So, whatever that's for. So Millard Fillmore. So there are some little factoids about history with the controllers.
Very
office,
cool.
Right?
You never know what you're going to learn in this podcast.
You never know what you're going to learn. So when you play Trivial Pursuit, if you get a question about Jones Beach, where's that from? Or, Millard Fillmore, what was he before he was president?
Jeopardy questions.
Yeah. You're not going to impress too many people with that information, but
in our circles, it's impressive though. It's fun, right? It's fun to learn these little tidbits.
I don't want to be known as the Millard Fillmore of controller world, but as I said, he supposedly was a very good controller. But how he was as president is probably another story.
So, I appreciate you coming in today. I appreciate everything we've spoken about. One thing that I do want to point out again is how at the end you spoke about dignity of the cops and how cops are treated, not just in retirement, but while working. And we appreciate you saying that. We know you've always had our backs. You appreciate the work we do. It's never been questioned. And I just want to point out, especially to our membership, that you have never caved to any sort of political pressure to do anything you didn't feel was right in your heart. And I appreciate that. It speaks to your character. And I have a lot of confidence with you sitting in that chair.
Absolutely.
That I'll be able to retire with dignity. And I appreciate the work you do.
Thank you, CJ. Thank you, Tanner. It's a great conversation. Just thanks for what you do on behalf of your colleagues.
Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah.
That's great.
Appreciate it, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.